Okay, thank you all for coming to this meeting. Now, my name is Michael Coulston. I'm from Lewisham Stop the War. Now, I'm here, firstly, because I recognise the huge debt that the anti-war movement owes to journalists like Julian Assange. And we know about imprisonment, torture, and killing of civilians in faraway places like Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's quite difficult to come to terms with the fact that the journalist who gave our movement so much is actually being imprisoned and tortured himself, not in some faraway or remote location, but one bus ride away from where I live. So I feel that it's my local shame that this is happening right on our doorstep here. So this evening, we're going to be hearing firstly from Sami Ramadani, who is an Iraqi exile, who's on the steering committee of Stop the War Coalition. And he's going to be speaking about some of the things that we know thanks to Julian Assange. Then we're going to hear from Emmy Butlin, who has been campaigning tirelessly for a very long time for Julian. And she's the coordinator of the Committee for the Defence of Julian Assange. And then finally, we'll hear from Helen Mercer, who is a local health campaigner. And she's the founder of the Greenwich and Lewisham Assange campaign. And she's going to be talking about some of the local lobbying that's taken place around the local duty of care from the council, the health authority, and so on, and some other local activities that have been going on. Each speaker will speak for around about 10 minutes, and then we'll take groups of points and questions after all the speakers have gone and give them a chance to come back and respond. So I'm going to open now by asking Sami Ramadani to speak. I'll unmute you or ask you to unmute.
Okay, I have unmuted, I think, if you
Great.
can
Yes,
hear
we
me.
can hear you.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, for inviting me and for introducing the whole meeting and arranging it. And I thank Helen as well for her efforts arranging this meeting. I think Julian Assange deserves a great deal of credit in one particular area, which is exposing war crimes. Obviously, WikiLeaks, which he founded and led, exposed lots of crimes and nefarious activities that various states have committed. But the fact that he's in a London jail, practically, according to the United Nations Rapporteur on Human Rights, practically is being tortured. And the main reason for that is him exposing US-led war crimes. And one of the most important revelations and revealing of facts, the truth about the war, invasion, and occupation of Iraq, was WikiLeaks' enormous find in terms of the documents, tens of thousands of documents that were released about the Iraq war. These documents were obtained by Chelsea Manning, who was serving in the US forces among the occupation forces in Iraq, US-led occupation forces. He is also languishing in a jail in the United States, or has languished for several years. Julian Assange's detention relates to those exposures. People didn't want to believe it. People wanted to smear Julian's reputation, but that is the truth, and it has come out eventually. They used all sorts of pretexts to arrest him, to silence him, but the truth has come out eventually, that he's in jail because he told truth to power, because he was an honorable journalist and a publisher who could not tolerate not exposing such crimes. There was one incident, one event which played a major role worldwide in exposing US war crimes in Iraq. And that was a film of US helicopters targeting a US helicopter gunship targeting a group of Iraqi civilians, uh, among whom there were two Reuters journalists. And the pilot and the military and the helicopter gunship requested permission to shoot the group of people. And the film is is shot from the helicopter itself, and it showed the killing, the shooting down of the civilians, including the two Reuters journalists, who were both killed. Now that film, when WikiLeaks released that footage, it became a worldwide event, because up to that moment there were lots that was exposed about war crimes, especially by Iraqis. But to release a film like that and to show what the US-led forces are doing to Iraqi civilians had an enormous impact worldwide. It became one of the landmarks of exposing US crimes against the Iraqi people. As we all know, they killed up to 1 million Iraqis. Their cause of death was directly related to the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. And the brutality of the US forces across Iraq, not only during the initial bombardments and invasion, but the campaigns they waged to strengthen their occupation of Iraq, because the people did not go quiet or accept the occupation. They rejected the occupation. They resisted the occupation in many different ways, including armed resistance to the occupation. And the US retaliated through collective punishment, practically, against towns and villages and neighborhoods, torture in prisons, the Abu Ghraib infamous jail, which was a Saddam regime jail in which people were tortured. The US actually turned that prison into if you like, an advanced form of torture of people. Some of those people tortured were sexually assaulted and filmed, and those films were used to silence them or to make them work with US forces as spies. And they released them into various neighborhoods to spy on the Iraqi people, having filmed them being abused or forced to abuse other prisoners. They killed prisoners under torture, not only in Abu Ghraib, but various torture and prison centers across Iraq. All these crimes, because of the activities of WikiLeaks and the exposure, documented exposure of other US crimes, attracted attention to the entire range of crimes of the US-led forces. So the Iraqi people, certainly I for one, and I know many Iraqis, and I'm obviously in touch with Iraq and Iraqi public opinion. Everybody is grateful to what Julian Assange did, and everybody is concerned for his health, for his life, because this cruelty towards somebody who is being punished and tortured practically just because he exposed the truth is really a major crime. It's not only aimed against Julian as a person, but against the truth in general, against exposing crimes, against exposing nefarious activities by powers controlling our lives. He's an example that they want to quash. They want to destroy such phenomena. They want all journalists to toe the line and to be sycophants of existing power structures. And the mainstream media really is a good example. Unfortunately, most editors, owners of these establishments, and most of the journalists in these establishments have been kept quiet, and they sing the tune of whatever the government wants to tell them. They have these private briefings by politicians. They get fed all sorts of false news items and so on, and they regurgitate them and they dish them out to the public, and most of the public lives in ignorance, really. Where do we get our news from? We turn on the BBC, ITV, or the US media, and all we get is practically state propaganda. They do not tell us the truth about anything practically. I mean, as I speak, they are talking about 37 billion pounds being paid to God knows who to fund a failed test and trace system during the COVID. 37 billion pounds. Where did it all go? How come our journalists are not investigating it, while our nurses are being paid 1% rise? They are committing incredible crimes in Yemen today. Millions of people are threatened with starvation, with death, because Britain, United States, and so on are backing the Saudi ruthless rulers who are bombing millions of people in Yemen, blockading one of the poorest countries in the world, Yemen, blockading it. People are under siege. No food is allowed. Nothing is allowed. No medicine. And US and British planes are bombing the hell out of the people of Yemen. Innocent people, poor people. And our media, I was really astounded the other day when I was watching on the BBC, and the headline said there is a report from Yemen. I said, oh, at last we might hear of it. And the reporter simply went to a village, a neighborhood, where there was a school, in fact, uh, which was an empty shell. It's been bombed, obviously, uh, turned into ruins. And she failed to mention completely that these bombs didn't just fall from the sky by their own. These bombs came from either British or US or French planes. And there are logistical command centers in Saudi Arabia which are manned by US, French, and British officers and others. Now, what sort of journalist is that who refuses to tell people the truth? That is why somebody like Julian Assange is a precious person. We all owe him a debt of gratitude, not just the people of Iraq or Afghanistan or other parts of the world where he exposed nefarious activities and crimes by states. We all owe him a debt of honor. He should be defended. We should never keep quiet until he's free. This application for extradition to the United States is practically a request to kill him, because if you calculate all the terms of prison that the US is asking for the prosecution allegations, he would spend 750 years in jail. And we know what US jails are like when it comes to solitary confinement and practically torturing prisoners. As if Belmarsh prison is not bad enough, they want to ship him all the way to the United States to finish him off and kill him. That's a crime against humanity in itself, and we should all stand by Julian and never keep silent about it, and to defend him, to expose the conditions he's imprisoned under, and ask all journalists. There are some exceptions, journalists of honor who have defended Assange. And we should put pressure on our members of parliament, on journalists, on the media, so that the earlier Julian release is better, to save his life and to defend his right as a journalist to speak out and to publish. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. That was excellent. I think you've said very simply and clearly why Julian is so important, and you're right about the state of journalism compared with what happens to a real journalist. But from someone closer to that, I'm going to move straight on to Emmy Butlin now, from the Committee for the Defence of Julian Assange. I will. I think I'm asking you to unmute. There you go.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be amongst you in this Lewisham Stop the War coalition meeting and to talk about Julian Assange. It's been very moving to listen to Sami Ramadani as an Iraqi lecturer and now in Britain so many years, established in this country, recount the damage that was done in Iraq, the war crimes perpetrated by the EU administration and its allies in the Middle East, which so haunts us daily while we live our lives relatively peacefully in this country. Still, the people who have died and suffered in those countries haunt us, and they seek justice. WikiLeaks, in its publications, seeks to offer justice to these people, to the thousands and millions that have gone, to the thousands and millions who have suffered, either physically or mentally, through the warfare cast upon them by the most powerful military machine this world has ever seen. We find ourselves the audience of this. Yet some, like the people working for WikiLeaks, and in particular Julian Assange, decided to do something about it, created a system for whistleblowers and people of conscience to step up, step forward, protecting their anonymity and submit to him evidence that could bring truth, and bringing up the truth, it should bring justice for thousands and millions of people. And Chelsea Manning was one of these people who stepped up, having watched and witnessed herself in Iraq as a US soldier, the injustices there, followed her conscience and released to the world via WikiLeaks the war crimes, proof of war crimes perpetrated by the US administration, seeking for change, seeking for the truth to bring about a change, political, social, cultural change, in the belief that when we as people know the truth, can look ourselves with courage in the mirror and guide our steps and influence our governments, and in democracies force our governments to act in a certain way and stop the wars, stop the crimes, and bring justice to these people through reparations. Now, I would like to have a very short review of what happened to Julian Assange prior to his violent expulsion from the Ecuadorian embassy, because I witnessed it for 6.5 years, participating in a solidarity vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy with other like-minded people in a very small and modest way. We stood witness of what was happening there on a weekly basis, distributing flyers, holding banners and posters, and talking to the passers-by, keeping the flame alive of solidarity for this man who was besieged inside the embassy. So I'll do a very brief review, explaining that the US administration had been embarrassed by the WikiLeaks revelation since already 2010, and since 2010 had started a grand jury investigation into the activities of WikiLeaks in view of indicting Julian Assange and his staff for their publishing work. The grand jury was not a secret. People who had been called to testify broke the secrecy laws and informed the world. In Chelsea Manning's trial, it was referenced, and through statements of the US administration, the people knew, the world knew that this persecution against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange was ongoing from the US administration. Yet it was not easily acknowledged by the media in their reporting or by other governments like the UK government and others in their deliberations about Julian Assange. So to protect himself from the prospect of extradition to the US, he sought in the summer of 2012 and received political asylum by going inside the Ecuadorian embassy. But the UK did not grant him safe passage, and he remained besieged by the UK police for 6.5 years inside the embassy. As the years went by, consecutive US administrations continued to investigate Julian Assange and his staff, even going as far as launching a CIA operation in 2016 in the heart of London by recruiting the embassy security company UC Global to spy on him and his visitors, including his doctors and lawyers, and discussing plans to kidnap and even poison him. These things are true. These things happened in the heart of London, and he endured and he pursued continuing his publications throughout the 6.5 embassy years. In December 2017, the US administration sent a diplomatic note to the UK authorities, who issued an arrest warrant for Julian Assange in the event he attempted to leave under diplomatic protection, as he had obtained Ecuadorian citizenship, and efforts were being made to bestow upon him diplomatic protection. That plan never materialized, and so the extradition, the arrest warrant that the UK government had issued in December of 2017 lapsed. More than a year later, in March 2018, Julian Assange was indicted on one account of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, but this indictment remains sealed, as all such grand jury indictments are, until the person of interest is arrested. Julian Assange was violently arrested and expelled by the Ecuadorian embassy in April 2019, and the indictment was unsealed. The following month, a superseding indictment was unsealed, charging him with 17 counts of charges, with charges under the 1917 US Espionage Act for soliciting, obtaining, and publishing classified information pertaining to the Chelsea Manning disclosures. Rules of engagement, which include the collateral murder video that Rami Samandani earlier mentioned so eloquently, Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, Guantanamo Bay files, Cablegate. And now we go to the proceedings at court in the UK, the US extradition proceedings, which took place in February 2020 over a week, and then later on in September 2020 at the Old Bailey over almost 4 weeks. During those 4 weeks, we have two sides of the extradition. First of all, what we discovered from disclosures, witness statements during the extradition procedure, and the other aspect is what we actually experienced with regards to due process. I would like to mention the due process first. We very quickly realized that both in February 2020 and continuing in September 2020, this was supposed to be a secret trial. Every attempt was made by the authorities to restrict the access of the public inside the court. This was extraordinary. They restricted the public, so literally zero number of people were able to go inside the Old Bailey in September from members of the public. The only people that were managed to get in were four or five who were either from NGOs or representatives of legal observers. And they managed to do so because they queued. They queued outside the court for 6 hours. for 6 hours waiting in the cold, under constant harassment from the police. I know because I was there. I was there to assist them, to try to help them to get in, and I stood with them. Throughout, they were treated, both them and the public, with contempt, as if we had no place in the process. There was certainly the element of intimidation in the proceedings, as well as a virtual secret trial. Obstacles were being given and created all the time by the authorities to prevent members of the public and concerned non-governmental organizations from witnessing the proceedings. Virtual access was also restricted to a very small number of journalists. The criteria for selection of who was given access, virtual access to the trial, has never been revealed. It was arbitrarily decided by the judge who was going to get access and who isn't. And in fact, she took direct action herself, Judge Vanessa Barreza, to revoke access to over 40 NGOs and members of parliament from around the world who had registered as people of interest who wanted to observe as political and legal observers virtually, and she stopped that. So we've had this climate of secrecy, climate of intimidation at court, which was evident to most people, but was not reported in the media as such. To the few media organizations who reported from the extradition process, they looked for whatever the United States was saying. This was what mostly they reported. But there were some things that came through, and this is the second part I wanted to mention. We found out by attending and listening to the few journalists who managed to get the truth out of the court that people like Khaled El-Masri, who had been the victim of rendition, gave a testimony to the usefulness of WikiLeaks in his journey for justice against the CIA renditions, how he had suffered, how he had been tortured in Afghanistan, a completely innocent person, a mistaken identity, his life almost ruined, his family life destroyed, and how, with the assistance of his lawyers, consulting documents released by WikiLeaks, in particular diplomatic cables from the US Embassy in Germany, who made reference to his case, he was able to find some justice and also to be believed that his story was true. So we learned about his journey, which was extremely moving. We learned another case, listening to Reprieve, representative of Reprieve, an organization that has been working for many, many years to help alleviate the victims of drone warfare in Pakistan, and how he spoke so eloquently that WikiLeaks cables stopped the killings of over 300 people per year by stopping the drone program in Pakistan, the US drone program in Pakistan. And they did that by using original diplomatic cables coming from the US embassies in Pakistan and the State Department in the US. WikiLeaks is the gift that keeps on giving, because it encourages people to look, search for the knowledge, and provides original documents that have 100% accuracy that can be used in courts of law around the world. The truth that is revealed is not just a passing article. It remains in the depository of people who seek justice. And that is why it is viewed as a dangerous thing, because it empowers people to pursue justice against the war crimes perpetrated. What has happened with the extradition hearing is that they concluded in September. Over autumn, both the US and Julian Assange's lawyers keep submitting the final statements. And then on the 4th of January of this year, 2021, we were all astounded on the 4th of January when Vanessa Baraitser decided not to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. I was outside the court, having circled the court several times trying to escape the police, literally, who wanted us to move away and not to be there. And when I heard the good news, I shouted victory. I raised my fist and I shouted victory 3 times. The jubilation was amazing. We couldn't believe it. I had not been able to hear, obviously, I wasn't a witness inside the court to hear the entirety of her decision. All I heard was no extradition. And my goodness, didn't my heart, beats fast, and the smiles and congratulations from colleagues and comrades on this journey for many, many years. But as the enthusiasm quietened down and I looked at the actual decision of Vanessa Baraitser, I realized that whilst she was showing compassion and using a compassionate clause of the law to avoid US extradition, she in fact agreed with every single argument that the US administration put forward against Julian Assange. And when I realized that, I froze, because I'd never expect to hear it so blatantly put, that journalists in this country and globally are naked in front of the US administration power, a power that can be applied extraterritorially. It doesn't matter in which part of the world a journalist may write a story revealing war crimes, revealing the truth. This judgment of Vanessa Baraitser creates a legal precedent internationally, morally, for some people, for the US administration and its allies, because US allies mimic and copy whatever the United States is doing, because they feel they have carte blanche. If the US government, who puts the standards around the globe, can do that, why couldn't I do it, will say Mr. Erdogan. Why can't I do it, will say Saudi Arabia. And others around the world, the US allies. So with one decision, a British judge allows them to perpetrate this tremendous spread of US power around the world. And what are we to do about it? Because the truth has to come out. We live in democracy, we want to make progress. We need to have access to truthful information. And we need to have ways of curbing this unstoppable power, military power, that expands through the world with no accountability, no boundary. So it's going back to the Julian Assange case, his lawyers yet again are attempting to do a cross appeal. We do not know if this will become successful. When we say Julian Assange's freedom is my freedom, as we often say, we mean it. And it's the other way around, because he has taken upon himself, by pursuing his determination and pursuing his work, to change the world for our benefit. And this cross appeal is for the benefit of the journalists around the world. He's not acting selfishly. He is pursuing what he has always done, a worthy work of trying to change the world through his work, his publishing work, but also the determination of fighting for himself and fighting for every journalist in this country and around the world for the right to publish the truth. So as we defend him, we defend our rights, our democratic rights, very plainly, very simply, about our democratic rights to exercise what our conscience determines. I'm not a journalistic expert, but I turn to many NGOs that have followed the case, one after the other: Reporters Without Borders, the Committee to Defend Journalists, the International Federation of Journalism, the National Union of Journalists, all these wonderful institutions who have literally united in one voice against this terrible, terrible extradition request. And they do so because, of course, they realize that WikiLeaks has given us such wonderful gifts, but they do so also to protect their members as trade unions, as defenders of freedom of speech, defenders of a free press. And we have to clearly and squarely join them and join the fight to free Julian Assange, so that the good powers in this world survive and thrive, and that we can make progress in civil society, and we can leave behind the mistakes of the past, face the truth fairly and squarely, look ourselves in the mirror, see the consequences of our actions, and reform. This is the perpetual hope of humanity, that we must never give up. And just like Julian Assange fights, so do we. We fight for his freedom. And I'd like everyone to join these efforts, both at local level, everyone with what we can do, no more, no less. If you are a painter, paint. If you're a dancer, dance. If you're a writer, write. If you have feet, go outside the court and come and stand and hold a poster or a banner, distribute a flyer. Everything counts. Put a sticker, put a poster up to spread the word that this man has to be freed by this government.
That's powerful
and
stuff.
That's where I end.
Thank you very much. That's very powerful stuff. And I know people are going to want to come back with questions and points, but I'm going to move straight on to Helen Mercer first, and then we'll come back to more questions.
Okay, can you hear me? Yep. Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to Sami and for Emmy for their speeches. I'll try and be short because I think we've been here quite a long time now, so I'll try and cut short a lot of what I've said. But what I want to do is to focus much more on the locality, our locality, Greenwich, the borough where Belmarsh Prison itself is situated. I believe that ours was the first campaign set up locally to defend Julian Assange. And as Michael said in the introduction, the fact that somebody who is a victim of psychological torture and possibly ongoing torture is actually just a few miles down the road concentrates the mind wonderfully. Now, Belmarsh Prison itself was built on part of the eastern end of the old Royal Arsenal, for those of you who don't know the area. And for 450 years, from the days of Henry VIII until about the 1950s, in an area which stretched from Woolwich for 2 to 3 miles right along the River Thames, it became one of the biggest concentrations of armaments production in the world, right into the Second World War. And it was also a vast secret. You could not take aerial photographs of Belmarsh. There were very strict secret rules about people working there, and it employed 80,000 people. It was of major importance, a major employer in the area. And of course, this is one of the very cruel ironies, or another cruel irony of Assange's current situation. Now, as a local organisation, we were very aware of the report by Niels Meltzer as a rapporteur, UN rapporteur on torture, of the fact that Julian had been a victim of psychological torture. He was a victim as a result of the years spent in what the United Nations itself designated as arbitrary detention in the Ecuadorian embassy. Arbitrary detention because he didn't need to be there had the British and the Swedish authorities pursued things accurately and properly and with due procedure. That was done with the connivance of the Crown Prosecution Service for a time, led by Keir Starmer. And he had also there, as Emmy has sort of outlined, undergone surveillance, and he had not even been able to step outside for medical reasons. And for all these reasons, and the media defamation, the character assassination, the vilification in the press, all of these things added up, contributed collectively to psychological torture. So one of our main concerns as a local group was about his health and his continuing healthcare in Belmarsh. And we did various things to try and raise this with local institutions who one might think might take an interest in it. The first one that we approached was Greenwich Council, and we raised a question about Greenwich Council's duty of care. All councils have a duty of care to prisoners which are in their area. And we raised a question there. We got a bureaucratic answer back, but we also got a round of public applause from the gallery, which is very interesting in the public meeting. But the most, I think the council is pretty well completely to a man, Labour. It was quite clear that most of the councillors hated it. They hated it, and they tried to shut up the speaker. Now, the next thing we also did was in the November of 2019, there were the elections, and we went to various election hustings meetings. Every single time one of us tried to get up and ask a question, as soon as we mentioned the word Assange or Belmarsh, the chair would step in to shut us up. And on one of the occasions where that happened was a meeting of the United Nations Association in Belmarsh, not in Belmarsh, in Greenwich. So that the worthies of the area and the politicians in the area just did not want to know. And the final thing I want to talk about is about his healthcare in Belmarsh. Now, one has to say the main blame for Julian Assange's mental and physical deterioration must lie with the British justice system, which has obviously most recently refused his release, even during COVID when he has a lung condition, even because there are no charges. He has been, even now when he has been, it's been said that he should not be extradited, he's still not being released. So the main problem lies with the British justice system itself. But I think we also need to look at what has happened to him in prison. Now, as a victim of psychological torture, what such victims require is relief, primarily relief from those conditions of torture. And one of the key things that's contributed to Assange's condition is the effective, the isolation in the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, what happened to Assange very shortly after he was moved to Belmarsh is that he was transferred to the healthcare unit there. And he was put in a regime there of what amounts to effective solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement is defined as being without human contact for 22 hours or more per day. And if it is prolonged, that is 15 days or more, it amounts to torture. And this has been pointed out by Niels Meltzer and others. His visits became less frequent, his access to lawyers was less, and he was finally removed from there about 7 months later, but as a result actually of petitions by prisoners. But it therefore means that the conditions which led up to the diagnosis of psychological torture were not relieved, and if they're not going to be relieved, it must mean to an extent that they're being deepened and intensified. And the grounds on which he was put there in the healthcare unit are not absolutely transparent, and that's come out from various FOI queries that have been made since. And a question has been raised as to whether his position there was even lawful. And I want to just very quickly try and put his treatment in the healthcare unit in a much wider context, because I think it's important to stress this, and put it in the context of 40 years of financial cuts, privatisation and the politicisation of British public services. We raised fairly quickly the question of Assange's health with the Oxley's NHS Trust about its work in Belmarsh, and subsequent questions have been raised by other campaigners. And in particular, we raised the issue of their observation of various international protocols and charters about the care of victims of torture. The replies given to us and other rather more persistent inquiries have been what I would call limited, highly bureaucratic, and basically uninformative. Now, we accept that they can't breach patient confidentiality and nobody is asking them to. But I think there is one fundamental problem we've come up against in all the replies that we've received. You see, the response of the British authorities to Niels Meltzer's report of psychological torture was to dismiss it, absolutely dismiss it, not pay any regard to it. In fact, they sneered at it in a way which was later to be criticised by another member of the UN. If the health authority were to in any way seen to be accepting there was any form of torture around, they could be seen to be endorsing a report which the British government itself rejects. Therefore, there's a politicisation going on. The other reason, I think, we have to realise that the British Health Service has been outsourced and fragmented for years now. Oxley's NHS Trust did not naturally, it is the local NHS Trust, but it did not naturally and automatically take on healthcare at Belmarsh. It had to win the contract. And it actually has contracts for, I think, up to 12 other prisons in London and the Kent area. Now, it must think that these contracts are lucrative, otherwise why would they not bid for them? And they want, presumably, to have more of them. Now, that again might be influencing what happens. And I think we can see this fragmentation of service also renders the continuity of care, consistent observations of procedure and standards, comprehensive oversight of systems almost impossible. And I think that situation can be seen also in the prison service. Until Carillion collapsed in 2018, it had the contract to maintain the physical buildings at Belmarsh. Serco, a unit of Serco, has the contract for the escort services there. And in fact, there was a select committee report into healthcare in prisons, and one of them went to Belmarsh, and it found that there's a problem in maintaining the physical condition of a building and responding to healthcare needs if you don't have the direct control over the actual physical maintenance. And I think finally, I want to mention about the NHS, it has come down very hard on its own whistleblowers. There's one very high profile case currently going through the High Courts, actually relating to unsafe conditions at a local Woolwich hospital. The NHS whistleblowers face risk suspension, dismissal, bullying, vilification, and the NHS is willing to spend millions on fighting their own cases. Wouldn't it be nice if we still had WikiLeaks, if whistleblowers on the NHS could deposit their documents with WikiLeaks and so protect our own public services? And I want finally to raise this point, that the fact that people have not raised their voices enough in defence of Assange has encouraged the powers that be generally to go almost see how much further they can go in silencing dissent. There's a censorship at all levels in British society now, which is a creeping disease. In the US, using Trump as an excuse, there is now widespread censorship of websites and podcasts, which are often very critical of critical websites which fight for Medicare for all and also raise Assange's case. And all these issues become interconnected. So we need to fight to keep our democratic rights and keep our democratic freedoms, and the fight for Assange is central to that. But we also need to fight to recognise the interconnections between these fights. And in the fighting to save Assange and fighting to save WikiLeaks, we're fighting for our own ability to defend our own public services. And that's...
Oh, thank you. That's very important and somewhat different perspective from what we usually hear, but really very significant and very relevant. Thank you very much to all the speakers for your contributions. I think it's been great. I want to open it up now for any points or questions people may have. We were originally intending to end at 9, but let's see how it goes. We'll maybe take a few questions, or if you want to put a quick question in the chat, then I can invite the speakers to come back and respond to those points.
Vin had his hand up.
Oh, sorry, didn't see it. Vin, can you unmute yourself and speak?
Yeah, I was just curious as to what is the technicality on which he's been held at the moment. What are they holding him on? If he's not going to be extradited, why isn't he able to leave? I know it should be out there in the news, but I do sort of look around and I can't find any kind of information on these sort of stories. So I just wanted to tell him if you could say a word about that. Why is he being held now in Belmarsh?
That's a very good question.
He's simply, I mean, there is no reason. I mean, he's being held awaiting the outcome of the US appeal and the possible defense counter appeal. There is no reason. He's in the under the harshest prison conditions he could be under. Emmy, would you like to add anything to that?
Oh, hang on, you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. You're very right. On the 6th of January, there was an application by his legal defense team for bail, which was denied by Judge Vanessa Barreza on the basis he consisted a flight risk. Arguments were put forward about his links to this country, about her mere decision, her sheer decision not to extradite him made Britain probably the safest place for him to stay, because if he flies back to Australia, the US may indict him there. If he flies off to Europe, the same. If he flies in any country of the world, it's the same. The US will continue their persecution of him, but it was denied. So no, he's to remain there. We have to apply pressure, political pressure, to the government to release him.
Can I just ask then, when's the appeal and how long will this take? Does anybody know that? Sorry to not have this information, but
The Emmy probably.
Yes, the 29th of March is the date that the defense has been given to submit its final arguments against extradition. The US has already submitted its filing at the end of February. I'm not aware if there are going to be further submissions from the US side into April, but I would expect that there will be, similarly like it happened in autumn. Therefore, it's very difficult to determine when the decision will be taken, whether this will go to the Court of Appeal or not. People who know about these things, legal people, have advised that more likely than not, the Court of Appeal will accept the US appeal, and therefore the case will be going to the High Court. With regards to timing, it could be anyone's guesses. From May till September, and considering the COVID pressures that the pandemic has put on the legal system and the court system, we saw again and again postponement of legal proceedings because of it. So availability of court will play a factor too. But let's be frank, politics in this issue play a big part. We are not aware what discussions are being made as we speak behind closed doors between the US administration and this government. We are hopeful that the new Biden administration may see that this is not to the best advantage of itself, but my own experience tells me that the US will continue to pursue this matter, as they've done so throughout various administrations, both both when the Democrats were in power and the Republicans. So I think the policy remains the same in effect.
There's a question in the chat. Has there been an attempt to use a common law court or lawyer? So, Birgit, I don't know if you'd like to maybe unmute and ask the question.
Yes. Obviously, we all know that the laws are rigged with all these legislations and COVID attempts to silence people. So common law has got quite success rate when they have taken individuals to court. I don't know if Julian Assange could be held directly with common law, but I definitely think that the people you have approached, like Amelia has told us, that people in the council, they can be personally taken to court and questioned about their act of care or not care. And they can be prosecuted. And that's very much likely to win. And if more people get prosecuted that way, then less people will actually be in that position to not care. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit complicated to get into common law, and I don't know everything about common law. There's a lot to learn, but I've been looking into it since the summer, just to protect myself, my family, and how to go forward with the whole thing. So I think it would be definitely worth looking into this.
Okay,
to
thank
use
you.
this alongside.
I'm just going to ask, Tim's got his hand raised. I'll let him ask his question and maybe come back.
Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for the three speakers. It's very interesting. I've done bits and pieces over the years, individually and collectively, but nothing like the commitment of Emmy and the others. One of the things that I raised when Julian Assange was taken from the embassy, especially in the context of Vivienne Westwood's claim and others, that this is a sham trial, and people have mentioned the political overtones of it. I wonder whether there was any consideration, or is there going to be any consideration, for following through from the logic of that idea of a sham trial and acknowledging the political dominance of this, to boycott the legal process. The legal process has dominated and led this, and ultimately people acknowledge its political context and yet still let the legal process go on, which is, I think, as Julian Westwood quite rightly said, a sham process.
Well, thank you.
May I say something about the sham process? It is a description widely used, primarily because this process is determined via a US-UK extradition treaty. This is a political agreement between two countries. Although we see the UK courts, the judges putting their gowns and their wigs, the courts are the same courts, the criminal, Central Criminal Court, Westminster Magistrates Court. In fact, they are not trials in the way that we expect the courts to act in a trial. This is, for example, just to give you an example, the US-UK extradition treaty is so skewed in favor of US that the prosecutor's argument cannot be, and witnesses cannot be cross-examined by defense. So in the appearance, we have the appearance of a court process taking place as if it is a trial, but the reality is that this is not based in the law that has been developed through centuries of lawmaking in this country. It's strictly within the context of the US-UK political agreement, and even that is not being applied because there is a particular article in that treaty that excludes extradition for political crimes. And part of the trial in September, the part of the extradition process in September, it was argued that this is a political persecution, and Julian Assange acted politically in publishing this information because he wished to bring about change, political and social change, and influence the government policy in these matters. Yet, Judge Vanessa Barreta refused to accept that this was a political prosecution or that the US extradition treaty, US-UK extradition treaty, should have the final word, because she claimed that when the US-UK extradition treaty became part of the local law in 2007, no mention was made about the political exclusion clause in the local legislation. Therefore, she did not take it into consideration in her judgment. So when we talk about a sham trial, we are basically using this as a figure of speech. It's not a trial, it's an extradition agreement, and we're giving it to the current legal and judicial system to arbitrate. As simple as that. It's a very bizarre situation. Larry Love, who was a security expert and has gone through the process himself, has called it Kafkaesque.
I'm gonna, I realize we're running short of time, but I want to quickly go to Sammy. If you've got any responses to the other speakers or to the questions raised, and then finally to Helen, who's going to give some local resources. She'll share her screen. You're still muted. You're still muted at the moment. Oh,
okay, just a few words that we should never give up on this one. And I really thank Amelia for her lovely contribution, moving contribution. And she reminded us how important Julian Assange, the campaign to free him, not only important to Julian, but to all of us, to the cause of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, questioning the powers that rule us. This is really a vital battle that goes far beyond saving Julian Assange, even though saving Julian Assange is a great humanitarian fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just finally, I'd like to go to Helen now. If you'd like to share your screen with the resources and answer any of those points yourself as well.
You're going to have to wait a minute while I share my screen. Sorry.
Yeah, it sometimes takes a few seconds. I will email everybody with the document of the useful links and so on, everyone who's in this meeting. And also I will invite people if they want to join any of our mailing lists. Here it comes.
Okay, I've just put up there some resources. So there is this paper I prepared, which has just a whole series of resources, people you can contact, including JDC, ME Represents, and Stop the War, and then various things that you can do. I've also included there Stella Morris. Stella Morris is Assange's fiance, and you can follow her. There are various things that you can do. I've included a very recent Banksy article, Banksy piece, which is great to circulate, and also further on is just what happened to us locally and some of the experiences we had trying to raise the issue of Assange with various local organisations. So as Michael said, he'll circulate that.
That's great. Thank you.
And just to thank everybody, and thanks Sammy and Emmy and everybody for all their questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get through them all, but we have run out of time.
Yeah, sorry about that, but thank you. Those are brilliant contributions. And just to mention, you mentioned Stella Morris. She spoke at the Stop the War AGM, where Stop the War nationally committed itself to supporting Julian Assange and to fighting his extradition. So that continues. Stop the War as an organisation will continue to do that, and we'll continue to work locally within the limits of pandemics. We had a history walk, not a march. We had a history walk planned. We were going to walk from Blackheath to Belmarsh, like revolting peasants. But unfortunately, that's had to be put off for the time being.
Yeah.
But we can reawaken these things, and we're starting to find ways of working during the pandemic. In the aftermath, we're finding things. We put everything on hold, but we're finding more and more things we can do now. So I hope that everybody here has been inspired by what they've heard, and that we'll stay in touch. And as I say, I will email you with that document. This is being recorded. I'll send you a link. I won't make it public, but I'll send you a link to the recording of this meeting if you want to come back to it. And other than that, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah,
I'll see you all again soon.
thank
This is like nobody when you can't put down the phone, isn't it?
you.